So it's really happening again. The much anticipated second summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump. Now the two leaders are set to sit down for dinner Wednesday evening local time before they sit down for their summit on Thursday. Now for a closer look at what's to come and what we can expect from the summit, we have with us Dr. Go명hyun, a research fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies on my right, and our Arirang's presidential office correspondent Hwang Ho-jun on my left. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so we are about to witness another history today and tomorrow between North Korea and the U.S. But do you think that the effect of their second handshake and their second meeting would be as significant as their first one, or would it lose its potency?
Well, obviously, the first handshake was more important. It was more historical because it happened for the first time. But this meeting, it comes with the additional burden of coming up with something concrete, a concrete outcome, a deliverable that's different from the first one. First one, the historical significance could mask all the shortfalls of the summit. Some people criticize it for being underwhelming because the expectation going into the first summit was that it would be a one-time only meeting between the two leaders, and North Korea would essentially deliver a major concession in the denuclearization. That didn't happen.
Right.
But then, back in the hints, after that, criticism became muted because people started appreciating the first summit for its historical significance again. But then with the second summit, the expectation that wasn't realized in the first time is still alive and kicking, and it's going to be affecting the expectation of the people watching this event right now.
Right.
And so this time, I think both President Trump and Kim Jong-un will have to deliver a concrete outcome, such as essentially material outcome, which we can put name to it, and there will be a material progress in terms of North Korea's dismantling nuclear capability. And then now we know that North Korea and the United States are discussing about a number of facilities here, such as Yongbyon nuclear facility, Punggye-ri nuclear test site, and Dongchang-ri missile test sites. So likelihood is that Dongchang-ri and Punggye-ri, these are more, relatively speaking, simple infrastructures, so they could be shut down permanently. But then additionally, I think it's possible for North Korea to deliver Yongbyon. But then it all depends on that. This time, these three names are going to have to figure in the final joint statement from the two leaders.
Right. So we are expecting more summits from here on out between the two leaders, but obviously they're under more pressure than their first one because of the results that came out of the Singapore summit. But what changes did we see in their relations, North Korea-U.S. relations, ever since the Singapore summit?
Well, there hasn't been the first summit was the breakthrough, essentially in terms of relations, not in terms of denuclearization, because there's been almost a semi-regular communication between the two leaders. It was unconventional communication because it wasn't a typical, say, personal meetings or between staffers.
Right.
And all that.
It was through letters, right?
Through letters,
Yes.
Exactly. That's very. But then again, we're talking about North Korea here, and then President Trump on the side of the United States. So it was very unconventional, but then the two leaders kept up regular contacts. And even though on the ground there hasn't been a significant progress in improving the relations between the two countries, the U.S. troops are still based there. The sanctions, most importantly, are still in effect. Actually, the U.S. administration increased the level of sanctions on North Korea by putting additional designations and sanctions entities on the list. So in that sense, on the ground, the things are, they were used to be in the past, but then at the personal level, strangely enough, has been a major progress. And I think we're going to see the continuation of that in Hanoi.
That's absolutely right. And even in the State of the Union address earlier this year, President Trump actually said, my relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is a good one. And the correspondence that you actually mentioned, he always talks about it as if it's a love letter. That's basically how the personal relationship actually improved between the two leaders, and even almost to a point where it's actually garnering some criticism over. Some of the reports were saying the two leaders are having a sharing a bromance, but at the same time, there are a lot of issues undealt with in North Korea right now. So.
And we've definitely seen a lot of changes ever since the Singapore summit and also President Moon Jae-in's third summit with Kim Jong-un in regards to South Korea and North Korea relations, right?
That's absolutely right. So President Moon has been the mediator between the two countries, and he actually kind of took the lead into improving relationship between the two Koreas, improving relationship between the U.S. and Pyongyang. And it's kind of being seen as he's actually going to continue to take the lead. Actually, recently, he coined a new term called the New Korean Peninsula Regime, basically saying he's not just going to stand by as this process progresses, kind of building a peace regime in the region. He's going to take the lead. South Korea is going to take the lead and going to be a part of this full-fledged economic cooperation. So basically he's saying rather than being in the periphery of history, he's going to be in the center of it. And it's true because even today, just a couple of hours ago, he actually had a meeting with the UAE leader, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. His name is a mouthful. It's, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. And he actually met with him today. And he actually said, hey, today is actually a really important day. The two leaders are meeting right now in Hanoi. And we would like you, he was calling for joint efforts to promote peace in the region. And the Crown Prince actually said, well, the peace in the region is not only important for South Korea, but it's also important for us in the Middle East. Opposite side of the globe, and saying we've been long friends, and what's important to South Korea is important to us. So President Moon is definitely taking the lead and promoting peace, and even though he's not in Hanoi right now, he's absolutely trying to be at the center of it.
Right, the summit is definitely going to affect a global peace process, right? Now, the most urgent task at hand, though, is for the two countries, is to come to a shared understanding of what exactly denuclearization would entail.
Well, that's a very good question, and I think that's going to be one of the major deliverable, if it happens, from the Hanoi summit, because the concept of denuclearization wasn't fully figured out in the first summit. Even it seemed like the President Trump was actually taking up the North Korean conception of the denuclearization, because actually the North Korea and the rest of the world pretty much use the same lingo to denote denuclearization. They call it complete denuclearization, but there's a slight difference between the North Korean definition and the United States definition of denuclearization. North Korea calls it the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, whereas the United States calls it complete denuclearization of North Korea, obviously. So the denuclearization definition from the United States is the one that we are most familiar with. Essentially, we are talking about calling for the complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear arsenal and capability. And that's been slightly modified by Secretary Pompeo, who called it a fully final, verifiable dismantlement, FFVD. But it's pretty much the same concept. So this, essentially the American definition of denuclearization puts the onus on North Korea, 100%, and North Korea has to go down the path of denuclearization the way the other aspirants for nuclear states such as Libya, South Africa, and former Soviet states such as Ukraine and Kazakhstan went through. So essentially open up the nuclear capability for inspection and then verification and dismantlement. Whereas North Korea is different. North Korea is calling for complete denuclearization of the entire Korean Peninsula, not just the northern half, but the southern half as well. It's actually calling for a reciprocal disarmament. We are talking, so if the American definition of denuclearization was referring to arms reduction or like arms dismantlement on the part of North Korea, what North Korea is calling for by saying complete denuclearization of the entire Korean Peninsula is calling for an arms control, arms reduction kind of agreement where North Korea is going to give up its nuclear capability conditional upon what the other side is going to give up to ensure the security of North Korea. So essentially, North Korea is using the nuclear capability as a bargaining chip here to further its security. So North Korea mentioned such as asked the United States to give North Korea guarantees to never deploy so-called strategic assets in the region. Strategic assets here, we're referring to nuclear armament, any delivery system that can carry nuclear armament to the Korean Peninsula, such as strategic bombers, missiles, and so forth. So this is, I mean, for the United States, this is like a very high demand, whereas for North Korea, they claim that it's essential to their security. So there's been a lot of discrepancy between the two sides and differences, obviously, about how to go about the denuclearization of North Korea when the scope of the denuclearization are very different here.
Right.
And I think, so the question here is, like in any diplomatic negotiations, how the two sides can come to an agreement, come to a midpoint between the maximalist expression of denuclearization, such as North Korea's, and the very minimalist focused denuclearization that only enters North Korea by the United States.
Right. There's a really tough line there. I mean, what exactly is the middle, right? I mean, with the two sides at the end of the branch. So, and now I'm wondering, as for the concessions that the two sides would make, I mean, what could we expect on that part?
So this is actually very interesting because I described already that what North Korea wants is the complete denuclearization of the entire Korean Peninsula. And by definition, what North Korea is demanding on the United States are security guarantees, but they're not just words. We're talking about actions, essentially asking the United States to step down, in terms of its defensive or military posture in the region, essentially affecting materially the U.S. regional security strategy. So this is a very difficult task on the part of the United States. So the United States, instead of offering this kind of security steps, is offering North Korea economic assistance, economic incentives. That's the reason why President Trump goes on and on talking about the economic success of North Korea. Putting Vietnam or Singapore as the model of economic reform and opening a lesson for North Korea to take.
Right, and then North Korea has great potential, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
So essentially, I mean, we can actually summarize this in a way, this position in a way that the United States offering to buy off North Korea economically, whereas North Korea is saying that's not enough. We want nuclear weapons. So that's the difficulty here. That's why we keep having this discussion. We keep having this summit, and that's the reason why the two sides haven't been able to make material progress in the last 8 months.
Now, as for the talks over a possible agreement on a joint political statement declaring an end to the Korean War, would we see this actually happen? And if so, how significant would this agreement be towards a peace treaty and ending the Korean War? Would we consider this as a strategic victory for North Korea?
Well, it's a symbolic gesture. I mean, we have talked about the declaration of end of war many, many times, and even the Blue House press corps, that's one of the most important things that we really want to know. Is it actually going to happen? But the Blue House spokesperson said, well, it's a possibility, and it can happen to any format and any degree. But the problem is, basically, we all think it's going to be a symbolic gesture because the Blue House spokesperson said, well, yes, a declaration of end of the war might happen, but it's different. He drew the line saying that it's different from a peace treaty. So the reason why he says that is because, well, South Korea and North Korea basically technically reached that agreement when President Moon visited Pyongyang last September and signed the military no hostile act agreement together. And Korea and South Korea and Beijing, China established diplomatic ties. Washington and Beijing normalized diplomatic ties in the 1970s. So basically that no war, end of war agreement, according to the spokesperson, has been already reached. What he's saying is that declaration needs to be made between Washington and Pyongyang this time. So, and that's one of the reasons why he's saying it's different from a peace treaty, because it's much more, that would be much more complicated. It would involve much more, many more countries to guarantee a security in the region. A lot of factors are involved in that as well. So that's why he's saying, yes, declaration of end of the war might happen. A peace treaty, well, it's going to be a long-term thing, and we can probably expect that at the last stage of the denuclearization process of the Korean Peninsula.
Right, it's a complicated process.
Well, no doubt about it, but we have to understand that the declaration to end the war, it's just a stop, small on the way to reach forming a peace regime in the Korean Peninsula. We have to understand that so far, the relationship between the two Koreas, how we interact with North Korea, how the way we resolve, especially in the military domain, any kind of tension and conflict was governed by the agreement reached during the armistice negotiation at the end of the Korean War in 1953. So the situation clearly has changed since then. So we want to move on to, everybody, including North Korea, wants to move on to a new regime, new way of dealing with each other that reflects the changes that took place since the end of the Korean War, obviously. And that we can call that a peace regime. But then in order to start the peace regime, we have to start from somewhere. So the start of this negotiation, would that involve declaring the end of the war? Well, maybe we need it, maybe not. So that's the reason why there's so much a discussion about whether we should declare the end of the war in the Korean Peninsula or not, because this is basically a political agreement to essentially signaling to the rest of the world that, look, we are trying to move on from armistice agreement that was signed 70 years ago, and move on, work towards the peace regime. But the peace regime, again, Ho-jun has mentioned already, it's a very complicated process. There's an issue of diplomatic recognition, diplomatic relations with other countries, but also just between the two Koreas, we have to establish new borders. Right now, we don't have a border with North Korea.
Right.
We have a DMZ, demilitarized zone. So we need to impose national borders. Then we have the complication of disputed areas between the two countries, such as the Yellow Sea area, where there's a lot. There's military skirmishes between the two Koreas because it's not really clear what's the line that separates the two Koreas there. So it's a very complicated negotiations. But then in order to start the whole process, we start from somewhere, and we are declaring the end of the war. But then some people take that as there's some concern, I would say, that making such a declaration will also signal the change of the status of the U.S. troops in the Korean Peninsula.
Right.
And that's the concern that some people have, that we are going to have peace in the military domain too quickly, essentially.
Right.
That's what we want, but then we want to see corresponding changes in the North Korean security posture towards South Korea and the rest of the world, essentially its nuclear capability.
Right,
So,
kind of going along with that, obviously another issue that could be raised between Kim Jong-un and Trump in Hanoi is the U.S. ROK alliance, and also, like you said, U.S. troops stationed in South Korea, which North Korea obviously does not really approve of, right?
Yeah, so definitely the two leaders are going to discuss about the status of the U.S. troops in South Korea. Probably North Korea is finding that the President Trump is possibly the most friendly year in the White House that they ever enjoyed in the last 70 years, because President Trump back in Singapore, actually even he's the one who unilaterally declared that he's going to cancel the joint military exercise that was scheduled for later last year.
That came as a surprise.
There's a lot of surprise. It came as a shock to many people because it took place without consulting with the U.S. ally here, South Korea. So, some people actually have this concern that President Trump is going to opt this act that he showed in Singapore, and this time he's going to declare that he's going to take the troops out of the Korean Peninsula. So, in that sense, in a way, the pressure to change the nature of the U.S. alliance with South Korea doesn't just come from North Korea. It also comes from Washington, in the personified by President Trump. And that's the danger here, in a way, because the U.S. troops has become, in a way, hasn't really been used in such a fashion, but the possibility of this is happening already. The U.S. troops has become a bargaining chip, a quid pro quo measure. Measure for North Korea's denuclearization steps.
And it's actually interesting, though, because it also raises the question, does Washington have a unified voice? As saying, Trump did say about, yes, this whole peace talks that's going on, but the U.S. versus Korea commander said time and time again, well, yes, peace talks that's going on, that's great, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that we're going to pull out troops from the Korean Peninsula. That's a completely separate thing. It doesn't go hand in hand. And as of now, there's no expectations. At least from what we hear from the U.S. versus Korea commander, they're not going to pull out the U.S. troops here in Korea, which obviously North Korea would want. They wouldn't want basically a threat, pointing at them down south. So.
I mean, we've definitely seen some reduced tensions on the Korean Peninsula because of those canceled joint drills between the U.S. and South Korea. But what other topics then, other than all this, other than also denuclearization of North Korea, could the two leaders discuss?
Well, we're definitely, I mean, the two leaders are definitely going to discuss about sanctions. Economic sanctions is the other side of the coin, so to speak, to North Korea's nuclear development. Sanctions is what really keeping North Korea in the negotiation table. They keep making North Korea come back to the table over and over again because North Korea wants to see some sort of a relaxation to the sanctions measures currently in place. And I think President Trump knows that fully, and then it makes him believe that the time is on his side. That he doesn't have to, I mean, he's not willing to exert pressure on North Korea. He has said that several times on Twitter that, he's totally okay with, what's going on right now. He's not in a hurry. And that's because the pressure is already on. President Trump believes the time is on his side because North Korea eventually will have to negotiate with the United States from a worse negotiating position as time goes by because of the sanctions.
Right.
So I think North Korea is conscious of it, and then North Korea wants to see essentially some sort of a reward, economic reward coming from President Trump in Hanoi in exchange for what North Korea has to put on the table for disarmament, I would say. That's going to
and one of the reward might be the joint economic cooperation between the two Koreas. And actually just a week ago, President Moon and President Trump actually held a phone conversation. And President Moon actually proposed to President Trump saying, hey, just to lessen your burden, we're actually determined to help you guys out. That's saying economic cooperation with North Korea. And basically, the Blue House actually said President Trump responded positively to that. So it is a possibility, sanctions, easing of sanctions against North Korea. And of course, President Moon and everybody in the Blue House is actually anxiously waiting to see if actually that's going to become a reality.
All right, well, let's wait and see what comes out of the summit tomorrow. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having us.